Mr. Rainwater,
Yeah, Jow.
how did you decide that you were going to be a comics webtoon guy as opposed to being, I don't know, a fashion designer or a filmmaker or a
Sure.
guy who does origami? What
Sure.
what was the deciding factor in, hey, I'm gonna draw stuff?
It was either that or game design, quite frankly, for a long time. I mean, I knew regardless of what I was going to do, I wanted to tell stories.
Right.
So, like, there were two major paths that I wanted to do for forever, basically. Because, like, I started drawing comics, like, when I was 5. You know what I mean? Really early. And it was something that became kind of second nature to me, to the point of, like, I remember in excuse me, in 4th grade, like, I was teaching how to draw comics in class, just as, like, it was a thing that our teacher wanted us to do. Everybody teaches them, or everybody teaches each other something that they know.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep, we did
I was
that
like,
too.
well, I'm gonna teach comics because that's the one thing that I know how to do that nobody else knows how to do. And so, like, it was always in the back of whatever, you know what I mean? It was always there. It never went away. All that changed for a while was, like, you know, I'd mess around with animation. I'd mess around with, like, coming up with ideas for video games and stuff like that. But for every single one of those things, it was always, the focus was on, I'm doing this because I want to make a story. And so what it came down to, really, ultimately, was my college experience. So, like, in college, I wanted to get into animation. And the first college I went to was Louisiana State University, LSU. They didn't really have an animation department.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. And I found out about SCAD. I actually remember that day pretty well, too, because, like, this was my graphic design course that I was taking at the time. And I was in my teacher's office, and she just had a bunch of stuff laying around. And one of the things that was laying around was this, like, this packet for the Savannah College of Art and Design. I just started flipping through it, and I was like, oh, shit, you know? Like, this sounds cool. I was looking at all the courses they had on offer, all the different departments they had on offer. So I ended up convincing my parents into, like, helping me with, like, getting into that college. I got scholarships and all this other stuff, so, like, that made it easier. And then when I got to SCAD, like, I had to make a decision on what major to pick, right? I took a tour through the animation department. I was impressed by it, and then I asked them, like, so what is y'all's focus here in animation? Do y'all focus on overall story, or do y'all focus more on just, like, character animation?
And
their
the
answer was
keyframes.
Yeah, keyframes, character animation, rigging, things that would get you a job very easily. Which, I mean, makes total sense.
Sure.
Right? Because that's
given the price tag of the college, absolutely.
Yeah, it's entry level. Those are entry level jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I looked at that. I was like, well, that's not really what I want to do. I want to write a story. I want to make a story from beginning to end, all the characters, the environment, everything. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because I'm a megalomaniac, I guess.
I think every artist is, so it's not really a shameful thing to admit.
So, basically, that was what chose my decision for the sequential art department, because the sequential art department was literally everything.
Your God.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, like, you're doing character design for storyboarding. You're doing storyboarding. You're learning about writing. You're learning, you're learning from the ground up how to draw in order to do all those things. And that was what always appealed to me from the very beginning. So, like, that's what ended up causing me to choose that as my major, and that ended up becoming the medium that I've been obsessed with for, like, the last, what, 20 years plus. You know what
Sure.
I mean? So that's my long-winded answer. How about you, Jow?
For why I went into filmmaking, you mean?
Yeah.
Same exact reasons, except I am a hard-headed, stubborn mule about wanting the biggest reaction I can get from people
Yeah.
possible. And I don't feel like I can get that from illustration, drawing, and, cartoon type stuff like that. Now,
I think you. I mean, I'm gonna. I might argue against my own medium and say I think you're right about that.
I'm
On a
not
certain level.
saying I haven't seen pieces of work that have literally made me drop my jaw, because
Sure.
there have been. It just
Yeah.
doesn't happen as often as,
Yeah.
or as lazy as this will sound. It's easier to get through film.
Yeah.
That's the way to put it. Now,
No, I agree.
it doesn't happen common in film. Like, there's a lot of laziness in film too. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. Sure.
But there is it's much more accessible through filmmaking. And I learned that in high school. I was the kid in the AV department. Now, I'm going to take y'all back for a minute. This was 2001, 2002. And the idea of editing a video on the computer was something that if I went into Best Buy and I asked them for a cord that allowed me to take data from the tape. We were still recording on tape back then, mini DV to be specific, and play it down so that I could record it in my computer. The guy at Best Buy looked at me like I had three heads. And that is not something that happens today, but that's where my brain was. So the moment that started becoming a little bit more accessible through Firewire and so on and so forth, even that term is extinct now. I was the guy who was like one step ahead. So like in AV class, I was the guy that realized I could have somebody standing in a shot, and then I could have them come out of the shot, and then I could cut them walking out, and I could do a crossfade effect between the two, and it would make them look like they're fading away. No one else in my high school realized that you could do this. Like, I had that creativity button. So the second I had videos, like music videos, I could show them. Even to this day, I still have them. That crossfade effect, man, that's what I went to. And that got all the oohs and ahs from the girls, first and foremost. That was the big takeaway. The other guys in the department, everybody was like, I want to team up with Andrew because he's going to do a lot of cool shit, and I want the credit for it. I want to get the A. And then the teachers, like even my teacher was like, Andrew's going to be the guy who goes somewhere. Sorry, Mr. Pett, I'm not there yet. But the point of it was I was able to get that wow factor. And going back, we've talked about this way in the past, I believe, but I forget which episode it was for which topic. But I remember watching Jurassic Park in a theater, seeing the dinosaur walk across the screen, and my jaw dropping. And I loved that feeling. And I kind of wanted to give that back to other people, outside of all the selfish reasons for wanting to go into film. But I like giving that feeling to people. I like evoking some kind of an emotion. It's grown into, I want to scare the shit out of you, or I want to make you cry. Like things that people don't necessarily always enjoy feeling, but I love the idea of evoking emotion in people. And I feel like the filmmaking is one of the most grounded, realistic ways to get that to happen. And, films have given so much to me. When I was lonely as a kid, I would watch movies and I wasn't feeling alone. So that's kind of the driving point as to why I go to filmmaking is like, I get that reaction. Yeah, it's easier to attain that reaction. And above all else, it makes me feel like I'm fulfilling a purpose and giving back to from what I've already taken in a weird way like that. But then on the same side, I'm like we talked about in the last episode, at least, and some episodes previous to that, I've been dabbling in other forms of art because I feel like they are more appropriate for the subject matter. Sure. So it kind of walked away from all of that reason. So like at the moment right now, I'm kind of teaching myself how to do animation, incidentally, because I have a short Christmas film story that I have, but I don't feel like it would be cheap to make. In like actuality,
Yeah.
and to spend that much money on a short film, which is not really profitable to begin with, is wasteful and not a position that I'm in. But I want to tell that story still. But I feel like I can still get that emotion out of people, that reaction, by doing it as like a claymation or a classical animation style. So it wouldn't be as clean as like today's animation, like a Rick and Morty looking thing. Like I would be the guy that would figure out how to add like dust and scratches and, you know, desaturate the color palette a little bit so it looks a little bit like it's a 1950s cartoon, or, you know,
Sure.
maybe just have all the audio be mono. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
all those little touches that kind of like spark that nostalgia. That kind of stuff speaks to me. So I still fulfill that aspect in everything that I try to do, where it's like I want to make people go wow. And that's really the baseline as to how I decide what medium I'm going to work in. 9 times out of 10 it usually ends up being film. But it ends up but that is the baseline. So if I look at something and I said, "You know what? If I did this as a comic book, I think that's really the best medium for it." That's what I would try and do. Or you know what I would probably do? I'd probably try and farm it out to like you or Joker or somebody way more talented with the hand-eye coordination than me. But that's always my baseline. So I'm curious to know, like you've talked about in the past with like music and then just now like game design and animation and stuff, is there a baseline that you think applies to you when you approach things? Because obviously you've thought about dabbling in other things, especially music. You've talked about that in the past. So I'm curious to know, can you identify a baseline in you that how you make that decision of what medium you think you're going to work in?
That's an interesting question because I think there have been times in my life where I wanted to make something to get like that kind of audience response.
Mm-hmm.
And more and more, I think I've been the kind of responses I'm looking for. I'm trying to basically reproduce an effect that I've had from some of my favorite books. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And for me, some of my favorite books had these moments of revelation about the world where I became aware of something I wasn't previously aware of in such a way that like it profoundly changed the way I thought about my life and thought about the world around me. And that's not like a small task, right?
No.
I mean, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
And I don't expect myself to succeed on that necessarily. So I try to at least get, laughs out of it too. You know what I mean? Like if I don't get to my bigger goal, at least I can get to my minor goal of like getting some good laughs in. You know what I mean? And having an enjoyable story that at least like you feel sympathy or you feel some sort of relation in the sense of, oh, I relate to that in my own life. I can see this mirrored in some things that I'm going through in my life. Because it's going back to what you were talking about not feeling alone. Like to me, that's probably after my primary goal of trying to say something that might be eye-opening for some people. My second one would be, making something where people don't feel alone, because I think that there are probably a fair number of people like me out there who feel kind of alienated by the world as it is right now.
Sure. By
like the culture of the world, or like sometimes the mean-spiritedness that a lot of people have, and that can be really alienating and isolating. And I think there are a lot of aspects of our current culture that I wouldn't say force people or compel people to act this way, but I think it's just a byproduct where people sort of have a mean-spiritedness to them that I don't even think they intend. You know what I mean? But it's just like, it's a very narcissistic kind of like, what were you going to say, Jow?
I was going to say it's kind of cynical.
Yeah, it is.
They expect the world to be bad, so they allow themselves to be cynics or selfish or mean spirit. You know what I mean? It's like, this is what's going to happen, and my only defense is to be an asshole. Like, that's a defense.
That's exactly...
It's not necessarily taking offense, like being a jerk. Like being the
Yeah.
jerk is the defense mechanism as opposed to being an offensive mechanism.
Yeah, and I've like lived. I mean, I lived several years like that, and I was miserable. And I kind of like I'm still going through all these different changes in my life where I'm, excuse me, going through a reassessment, of how I've been, what's been going on for myself, and why I was miserable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and for me, like something that from my childhood that I never wanted to let go of, and I did let go of for a while, was like a sense of optimism, not just for the future, but for like
Yeah.
day to day. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I don't want like to evoke some kind of optimism that's like candy coated or like, you know what I mean?
Disingenuine.
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Because
yeah,
that is the biggest way to
technology,
throw fuel on people's cynical fire. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Where it's like the
I
bullshit detector goes off the wire and they're just like, well, there's more example that good is bullshit. Good doesn't exist because this guy is clearly faking it. And that to me, yeah, that's absolutely. It's interesting that you pointed out that you were trying to recreate an experience that you had. It just seems that yours was more about thought provoke as opposed to emotional spectacle, which was mine. I have never, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've had those moments where I looked at something and I was like, wow, that really kind of fucks with my head a little bit. And I think on some level that's something that I will want to chase or have or am on a smaller level, but it's like that range for me differs. You know what I mean? Like we're operating on different frequencies where we're still kind of going in the same direction, but it's just, it's like parallel lines that aren't necessarily going to react. But it is interesting that you bring that up. The not feeling alone thing. Have you been following the Pumpkin Thief saga on my Twitter / Instagram?
I've seen some of it. I definitely commented at one point saying like, this is like one of those Lifetime movies where it turns out your spouse is involved in some way.
That kind of, when you were talking about like the cynicalness about like the world and stuff, I was thinking about this because, I mean, it just happened. For backstory to everybody listening who isn't up on it, I, for the very first time, was able to cultivate pumpkins in my backyard garden, and I was very proud of it. So I put them out on the front porch of my house. Now, let me clarify. I live on a busy street, but I've never had a package walk off. I've never had an Amazon and I order a lot of Amazon shit. And I've never had anything disappear. All of a sudden, this week, I had a pumpkin go missing. And I thought to myself, well, maybe the mailman knocked it over, felt bad, it smashed, and he threw it away or something like that. Hopefully I wouldn't notice. The very next day, a second pumpkin went missing. So then I got pissed. I was proud of this. Because I've tried to grow pumpkins at least 2 years now running, and I've failed catastrophically. So to succeed with multiple pumpkins was a pretty big thing for me. And then I was planning on using them in my Halloween display. And for having them get walked off, I felt very much like the world fucking blows. Like once, like one person stealing a pumpkin, okay. Then either a person stealing a pumpkin twice or two people stealing a pumpkin, like that's fucked up. Like that's messed up, especially 2 days in a row. So I put out a sign that said, "Dear pumpkin thief, you have now made a little kid cry twice. Try to be a better person." Now the little kid in reference is my 8-month-old son, who has no idea that I have pumpkins, but I didn't feel bad about writing that. I got a little selfish and cynical because I was like, well, this fucker is stealing pumpkins. Stealing my shit. So I put it out there. A couple of days go by. Nothing happens. No pumpkins go missing. Nothing. Yesterday, I go out there, and there is a plastic tray sitting between two of the pumpkins with 3 powdered donuts inside. 3, and it was a plastic tray that could probably hold about a dozen. So at least 9 of these donuts got eaten already. With a little piece of paper, with, ruled piece of paper inside. It says open on it in scribbly handwriting, which creeped me the fuck out. I opened it up and it said, sorry about the pumpkins. Here's some donuts. Sincerely, ex-pumpkin thief. And it was scribbly, very thin writing that makes you think that it was like a crazy person or a kid. And my wife is of the mindset that it was a kid who just saw it. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think a kid should I'm not going to teach my kid to go up on people's porches and just take shit. But at the same time, it was still a little kid. I am in agreement with her. I do think it was a little kid. They did write ex pumpkin thief, and if it was a little kid, I could see them going into their house looking for something, and like there's a thing of donuts that someone's already eaten, but they're like, you know what? That's good. It's give them food or whatever like that. And around the time, like the pumpkins used to go missing somewhere between like 2:30 and 4, which is about the time that school gets let out and the buses drop off and the kids walk by and all that stuff. Now, I didn't put a webcam out there or anything. I wish I did, but it wasn't working in the way that I'd be able to monitor it. So we don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was a kid. I tell that story to get to the point where I was pretty cynical that it was some asshole, like a grown-ass person or a college kid or something, you know what I mean, walking by and just taking shit because they felt like they were entitled to it. Whereas I don't think it's, appropriate for a little kid to steal it, but I could understand a little kid going, ooh, a pumpkin. Oh, mommy loves pumpkins. I want to bring her a pumpkin. They have like 12 pumpkins on the thing. They won't notice one missing. And they grab a pumpkin and they take it. And then, you know what I mean? And then mom is so excited when they get home. Oh my God, wow. And, they make up a lie and they say they got it from school or a friend or some shit like that. Or they found it. And mom is so happy. And then they think, oh, I need to make mom happy again. And then they do it again. You know what I mean? So like, I was the cynic in that instance where I was like, it's some asshole. And then you turn around and then, oh no, it was a little kid probably trying to, impress somebody or girl or mom or whatever like that. Sure. So I think that your instincts are right about the world thinking that people are bad and this and that. And that thought-provoking thing is something that's important. So I applaud you for having that as a goal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
in terms of your art is to change the perspective of it.
Yeah.
I just shared that story because I just wanted to reaffirm that I think your goal in art, if that is what it is, like you stated, I think that's admirable, and I applaud that, and I hope you continue to do that. And
and it's also just like, I think for myself, I'm also kind of missing that in media in general.
That you're
consuming.
Know what I mean? That you're consuming.
Yeah,
I know. I get that, wanting to fill that void. Absolutely.
Because it's like, for me, a lot of the superhero movies oftentimes come off as too candy coated or like too dark or whatever.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then like all the big thought provoking stuff that happens in theater, like sometimes it's really good, but it leaves me feeling kind of heavy. Like, like, like even Blade Runner 2049, which I really liked, like, I'm not going to watch it again because it's too fucking heavy a movie where it's just like depressing, dismal, it's just fucking dystopic as shit. And I'm just like, I don't think I want to do that again because I don't like feeling that way necessarily.
So you want something fun. There's got to be a balance between the fun entertainment factor, but also the thought-provoking aspect.
Sure. And that's why I've been getting into a lot of 90s action movies recently, is because like, well, they're kind of fucking stupid, which I enjoy.
Yeah.
Unlike just a visceral level, just like, oh, I can sit back and just enjoy this. I don't have to think about anything. Like, who knows what Bruce Willis is going to do in this fucking movie? Who knows what's going to happen? But like, it's fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like, I think that not just movies, but any kind of medium where it's narrative driven, you can find interesting compromises between what you're gonna do in that medium. Like, okay, it can be action. We can have a lot of action, but maybe it can be action, silly, and thought provoking. What would that look like? Not too many people have tried that, right? It's not something that happens too often.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm interested to kind of mess around with that for myself when I'm making comics. In comics, I would argue that books and comic books in general, because of the way that you read them, and I think this is also part of the reason why it's harder for people to get into them more recently, is because they're slow. They're like slow burn.
Sure.
They require you to kind of ease into it, get involved, and not You're not rushing into anything. And so the thought-provoking parts happen. It's kind of out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's stuff that kind of sets in over time as you put together all the bits and pieces of the narrative that you're taking in. Like, books are, like, specifically like prose books, on average they're 8-hour experiences, right? And like, that's a lot of time to put into something that most people don't actually really have nowadays, which for me, I feel like that's kind of unfortunate, right? Like, I don't even read books that much. I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I can listen to them while I work,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So like, I can that's where I have the opportunity to engage in that kind of media, where it's like, I have like an hour and a half plus to devote to this narrative, where sometimes there are going to be parts where it's kind of slow, and I'm listening to conversations between people where I'm having to put together stuff, in my head that took place like maybe 3 hours earlier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that works for what I do, but not everybody has that opportunity. So like, I understand why it's harder to get into books. And I'm saying all this because it's like something to consider, when thinking about medium is like their strengths and their weaknesses, right? So like, the strength for prose books is also its weakness. Its strength is you're more likely to have more in-depth, like, looks into characters, into worlds, into philosophy, morality, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is it takes a lot of time to get there, and a lot of effort, and it requires an audience member to like, you can't just be like half and half about it. Like, you can get the message of like the Avengers half paying attention to it.
Sure.
You can play a video game while watching it and still get the whole narrative for the most part.
Yeah.
You can't do that with a book. You can do that with an audiobook, I guess, but you can't do that with like reading a prose book.
I think the takeaway when you're reading a book, it asks you to engage your creativity 100%, because you're reading what's going on, but your brain is imagining everything that happens. This is why a lot of people say, "Oh, the movie isn't as good as the book." It's basically the same exact. They're saying the same thing that I say when I walk out of a movie theater and I go, "Yeah, that was okay. That wasn't that good." Because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about the story, the characters, the shot design, the music, the whatever, and I think to myself, that's not what I would have done. Whereas when you're reading a book, everybody reads the book. They all read the same exact letters and words arranged the same way, but they're seeing it differently. They're hearing it differently. They're pacing it differently. All that kind of stuff is engaged, right? So even when you listen to an audiobook, you're hearing someone else's voice say it, so their inflection is influencing you. Their voice, however old they are, their gender, their sexuality, like all that kind of stuff can bleed through just through a voice. So it's taking stuff away from you. But a book is like, hey, you're going to look at this thing and you're going to engage. You're going to imagine what this character looks like, what they sound like, how they walk. When they describe what's happening, if I'm saying, oh, I'm pushing a push pin around on the desk, you're going to see in your brain a close-up of that finger pushing that push pin. But I might read that line and say, oh, I see a very wide shot of a person sitting in an empty room by themselves, lonely, pushing a push pin around. You know what I mean? Like, that's where it engages differently. So you can't do that with any other medium. The books demand that you engage fully.
Related to our topic, but not necessarily, kind of a little off track. Did you ever read Animorphs by any chance?
Absolutely.
Okay. I know you were into Goosebumps, which I was too. I'm pretty sure those were pretty big books, right? Both Goosebumps and Animorphs. But
yep.
So the Animorphs books are actually pretty incredibly violent for like young adult books.
When they turn into alien, or when they turn into the actual animals, yes, right.
And they're like ripping aliens apart.
Yeah.
And like, there's a very specific scene that I still remember to this day. One of the characters turns into a gorilla, and like
Marco.
Yeah, K. Applegate describes the way that he punches through like the centipede, like alien,
Yeah.
as like it left, it left like a hole in its torso, the size of his fist, and I was just like, I can't believe I was allowed to read that as a child. That's kind of amazing. Anyway, Nickelodeon eventually adapted the book series, right?
Yep.
And as a child, I was excited, but also in the back of my mind, I thought, how are they going to do this? Because like it's Nickelodeon. Like I don't think they're going to allow this level of violence on the network. But maybe, right?
You actually thought they were gonna go violent on
I
Nickelodeon?
was just like, maybe they could. I don't know. It's Snick, right?
That's true. Nick did push the boundaries just a little bit more than Nick Jr. and Nick.
And then the show comes out, right? And it's like, I think the main, or one of the main characters' names was Jake. I think he turned into a tiger.
Yep.
Right? So there's like this scene where, okay, first of all, there was almost zero aliens because those are
I want to pause to point out the fact that the main character in a sci-fi actioner started with a J. That's another.
You're right.
Another Jack, another James, another John, another Jake. Continue.
What I was gonna say was, you know, I think there were a couple of very cheap, right, CGI graphics shots of like some of the aliens every once in a while, but mostly when they had the bad guys, it was some random dudes in like very plain uniforms or whatever, right?
Yep.
And so like most of the action sequences turned out to be like, you know, you see the dudes in the uniforms show up and they have guns that they never fire, and then you see the crappy Animorphs like transformation sequence, and then you see stock footage of a tiger or an eagle totally disconnected from the action happening on screen, and then you see the bad guys run away. And that was the adaptation we got. And like when I remember watching that and being like, well, this series is going to suck. Like everything that grasped my imagination in the book was not there in the television show.
Right.
The drama was there between any of the characters because the actors just weren't particularly great, you know, and like the special effects could not meet the
creative demands, of the content.
Exactly.
Sure.
So it's like, you know, maybe nowadays if they were like, hey, we're going to reboot Animorphs, they could probably do it. Maybe.
Do you think back in the day it would have been better if they had done it as a cartoon?
They still wouldn't have been able to do the violence aspect of it, though. They would have had to really skirt around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the most, like at that time, I think probably the most. There are two shows that skirted that as hard as they could. That was the Batman animated series, and that was X-Men. Both of those series came pretty close to having. Well, Batman definitely had moments where I was just like,
yeah,
I can't believe this is on network television and for children.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas X-Men, it was like there was a lot of violent action that took place, but once again, it's one of those things where they just figured out all these loopholes to sort of get around it and maybe engage the imagination a little bit more so that you're not, you know, it's not graphic necessarily.
Do you think that's more of a limitation of like the rules of the studio or like television standards or whatever, or the creative abilities of the people behind it? Do you think Bruce Timm and company were just that damn good that they were able to pull that off? Or do you think, and you know, like other cartoons or TV shows or whatever, like the Animorphs, they were either afraid or just, you know, too lazy or, you know, not good enough creatively to figure out ways to do it? What do you think was the deciding factor there?
I don't know this for certain, and I would love to ask Joker about this because he would probably have a more definitive answer. But my guess is that Bruce Timm knew how to work around executives. He knew how to, like, my guess is they had even more just like risque stuff that they wanted to have in the show, and kind of did the like push it as far as we can, and then cut what we have to cut, right? Like, I'm sure it's possible that there are so many deleted scenes from BTAS that were just like, you know, just never made it, and that was there specifically to be like, this is chopping block stuff so that we can get the stuff that we actually need.
So you think that's the creative business mind of an artist in that situation? Do you know what I mean?
I
Like
would
he
say
knew
so.
how to
Yeah.
navigate that water creatively.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I think a lot of artists need to figure out how to do, is to approach more than their art with their same creative gene. I mean, there's a problem with that because you only have so much per day. Like it's like that decision-making juice that you have in your brain. Like when you wake up in the morning, if you decide what color socks you're wearing, what shirt you're wearing, what you're having for breakfast, you've already made up or lost like 10% of your creative juice for that day, or decision-making juice, I should say. But I feel like that's one of the things that like a lot of artists need to know how to do, is like dedicating their creative abilities to problem solving outside of their medium. Since we're talking about medium, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a thing that a lot of people don't do. Like either they willfully hoard that creative ability just for their art, or by the time that they do it, they're like already spent, and it's, you know what I mean, like they're all out of it, so they're just back to human mode.
That's definitely like something that I personally struggle with a lot in terms of like marketing myself, as an artist, like, because I put so much of my effort into all of the creation aspect. It's like by the end of the day, or even at the beginning of the day, it just depends on when I'm figuring out when to do it, I'm just like, I don't even know where to start. You know what I mean? And like every once in a while, I'll have a burst of energy where I put effort into it, figure out like new ways to use social media or whatever tools that I have at my disposal, right, to apply it. But it is definitely like, it becomes very difficult, right, to do that stuff when you've spent so much effort on the actual thing that you want to get out in front of people's eyes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like I waste a lot of my creative ability trying to do something in a place where it isn't as well received. I don't know. It's like I can't quit kind of a thing. It's addicting. But social media. So I look at Twitter, and 9 times out of 10, maybe not 9 times, but maybe 6 out of 10, my tweets are something like a creative thing I would want to execute in a script. But instead of sitting down and writing a script or an outline or whatever like that, I go and I form it into a tweet and send it out there. So I've released that idea already right into the wild without any kind of editing, no thought to refine it or reinforce it or anything. You know what I mean? Like, I lose a lot of that because when I wrote Haunted initially, I was off of social media completely. There was no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook. I had gotten rid of all of them just because I needed to like get right mentally health, like emotionally health is how I like to refer to it.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, I still need to get this out, but I'm going to do it into a screenplay. And that's how I did it. And then after that, when I started winning awards and, you know what I mean, like all that shit, I wanted to promote that. So I got back on social media and I'm like, if I can distance myself and just, 3 tweets a day or blah, 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 then I'll be okay. But it's a fucking rabbit hole. Once it's got you, it pulls you back in and you get addicted. Like I have an addictive personality. Not that people become addicted to me, but I become addicted to things. And that's part of my problem is that now, I'm getting growth on Twitter and I'm growing that Twitter because most of the time I'm looking at it as, okay, this is potentially my audience. This is who I want to advertise to. So that's what I want to build. Building that requires engagement. I have to be present on Twitter and I have to engage and da-da-da. But I'm wasting a lot of my good stuff on that medium. Dare I call social media a medium? And then I find myself at the end of the day without things to say. You know what I mean? Like that's the irony of it is that, you ask my wife and she'll tell you that I'll never shut up. But I run out of either things to say or the willpower to say it because I'm just like, oh, that's an interesting thought. I've tweeted enough today. No, I don't want to type today. I don't. You know what I mean? Like all that juice is gone. So I feel like that's a waste.
Precious too.
It is. It really is. And learning to hoard, or not hoard, but to cultivate that particular juice
Yeah.
for an artist is really challenging. But like most things, I would definitely say it falls into the you just got to start. That's like the hardest part of anything,
Yeah.
whether it be working out or a diet or asking someone out on a date that you like. You know what I mean? Like the hardest part is taking that first step, doing that first thing, whether it's choosing to have a healthier breakfast, choosing to do the treadmill before you jump in the shower, or choosing up to walk up to somebody and just say, "Hey, I like your hair today." Like all that kind of stuff, like that first decision, it's all downhill from there. That's the cake of it.
Sure.
The problem is it's a lot easier to throw up that tweet, you know what I mean, than it is to, 140 characters versus, all right, I have 120 pages to elaborate on this idea. That's a lot of work, and that's going to take a long time, and that's going to be even longer before I can get a response for it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the social media becomes a drug, and it becomes my medium, and it sucks away all of my. Basically, the fucking Surgeon General should be like slapping warnings on Twitter and Instagram, because for artists, it's a fucking drug. It really is.
Sure. Well, that's what's interesting for me is like for me it's that my issue with social media is I actually like I struggle to figure out how to actually engage with it. It's like it's not like staring at a blank page and not knowing what to do with it. It's like for me it almost feels like having to learn like a totally different medium that I've never really been particularly amazing at. Like I know how to meet people and talk to them in person, but the digital divide where it's like you're trying to reach out to somebody through text and in pictures, but that's not like comics, you know what I mean? It's like something else. It's not intuitive for the way that my brain works, basically.
I'm going to tell you right now you're wrong, and I'll tell you how I know.
Sure, let me know.
I thought the exact same way that you thought. And I believe Joker's kind of talked about this too, about like how he'll put something up and it won't get any kind of a response. And then, it's like, well, someone else put up something like that and they got like 6,000 likes and, I didn't even get one. And mine was similar or something like that. I have tweeted thoughts that I've had, right? When I had less followers that got no response whatsoever. I've tweeted that same response now that I have over 1,000 followers, and one person has to like it, and then all of a sudden 12 people like it, and then it's retweeted 6 times, and all of a sudden it's a whole different story. So it's really weird, but I don't even know if it's the algorithm, but it's just that idea of you're throwing something out there, and if the 62 people that follow you don't necessarily see it, the 63rd person who's out there that would see it and spread it to the other people that are like you that do get it, you know what I mean? Like, they are MIA at that point in time. But that doesn't invalidate the fact that those other people are out there. It just means that they didn't see it because of whatever fucking technological reason you want to look at it.
Right.
But the point that I'm making is that the argument or the idea that you don't have a good grasp on Twitter or this or that, that's bullshit. Like, it's just the fact that you don't have access to the people who would connect to it. And that's, it's a hard thing to get behind. Like, I've put that out on Twitter before. It's like, do you unfollow people who don't follow you back? And I'm like, well, fuck yeah. Because I'm looking to engage with people. And if they're not looking to engage with me, then, why am I wasting my time?
Right.
But a lot of people are like, oh, I think that's bullshit. People that collect friends and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, no, like if that's gonna better the chances that I'll connect with someone on a thought, and I can develop these thoughts, and I'll be like, wow, this really got traction. This deserves more attention from me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm onto something here. It goes beyond just that feeling of validation, that little quick hit of adrenaline, and acceptance that every artist is looking for. But it's market research. If that makes any kind of sense. So
that makes sense.
Anyone who follows me, I'll follow them back. Just because that or I'll follow anyone who likes one of my tweets and hopes that they'll follow me back. Just because I'm feeling like I'm gonna get a connection out of there, and that's gonna grow my distribution pool. Now, I don't necessarily look at everyone on there as, customers. I'm not that like cold-hearted about it, but like I'm looking at people like-minded individuals who
Yeah.
maybe necessarily aren't artists, but they, everybody consumes art. So if I'm sharing art and they enjoy the art, we can be friends and they can also be my customers because they can also support me. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel insincere to me, but the idea that, it's not necessarily clicking because of the formatting of that particular medium, not necessarily. I'll leave it at that. I don't think it's necessarily fully bullshit because, it could be to some extent, but it also could not be. But I think you need to give it a little bit more of a different approach. I think that's the idea.
I think, well, particularly with Twitter, because it's interesting what you were talking about. Because I do that with Instagram, where I'll follow people back. Because most of the people who follow me on Instagram are also people who are making stuff and who are drawing, and they have an Instagram to post like their drawings and stuff.
And that's much
And
more
like,
your medium, the visual, as
it's more
opposed
my
to the
medium.
yeah.
And it's also like I want to see, like, especially if it's somebody who's younger, and I want to see how they develop as an artist, and like
That's interesting.
be available in the event that they're like, hey, I have questions about this or this or this.
That's
and
awesome.
I can be like, hey, here's feedback. Because for me, like, I go back to like, I mean, this site still exists, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. The old DeviantArt, right? Which was like, same kind of thing, but different, where it's very focused on people posting their art, talking about their art, liking it, and also having community, right? And for me, like, that has always been some of my favorite engagement on the internet, is just like having conversations with people, where we're talking about ideas in terms of how to get better as an artist, how to improve on what we're doing. And I know, like, for myself, like, there was a particular period where I did a lot of growth just from like having that kind of back and forth feedback with random strangers on the internet talking about art, right? So maybe I just need to figure out how to tune that more in my Twitter. And I've definitely been thinking of like maybe something I can do with my Twitter, because Twitter is a little bit better adjusted to this to a certain extent, is like talking more about like my process and what I do when I'm making stuff, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Because I think that that's something that resonates with people, and they want to hear that, and I want to talk about it. And I think that's something that for me, like, I've forgotten a lot about. I was like, well, I don't really care much about talking about politics or whatever. Like, I'm interested in like stocks and crypto and all this other stuff, but I don't really want to talk about it that much. What I do want to talk about any time of the day, if you ask me, is making art, because that's what I do, right? Like, so that's probably what I'm gonna end up doing, and not just for the purpose of like engaging with people, but also just to feel more engaged in general, and not just like making statements, on Twitter just to make statements. Because for me, that feels. I think for you, you've talked about this before, where you feel like what you're doing with Twitter is sort of like doodling, but with words, where you're thinking out stuff that you're going to write in time,
or that I
right?
intend to write, and then I put it out there, and that's kind of like writing masturbation. It's not fruitful in the slightest bit, but it makes me feel better.
Like, if I can, like, that for me is like the part that I'm trying to figure out is how can I engage with this in a way where I feel like it's productive for me, where I'm like, it's not just masturbatory, right?
Right.
Like, and I think most people probably want to feel like it's not just masturbatory, but like they're actually putting legitimate, important, or not even necessarily important, but just like thoughts that will get a response, right? But also thoughts that are authentic and genuine to them as a person. They want to be known, they want to be understood. And that's the part that I don't always fully grasp with social media all the time. And I've kind of gone through this phase of like, because I did have a political phase where I'm like, sending rude text to the mayor of Portland and shit like that, where it's like, after a while I'm like, that's kind of pointless. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because he's not gonna fucking read it. and I'm just like raging for no particular reason at all, you
Yeah.
know. And
That's rage masturbation right there. That's like anger
exactly.
masturbation. Absolutely. No, I completely, and I still see that to this day. With the, whether it be the vaccines or the masks or who's president, who's, who got screwed in the election, whatever the fuck people are complaining about.
Yeah.
There's literally, I look at both sides, whatever it may be, and I'm just like, are you screaming into the echo chamber? Like, these people are on your side. Why are you so mad? Like, if you have time to tweet about it, you have the time to go down to City Hall with a sign and march around in a circle
Yeah.
outside. Like, that's more productive than throwing out shit on Twitter.
Let me put it as this kind of analogy. Like, if you took somebody's like Twitter or Facebook page and just transposed it over to a sketchbook, right? And you just started flipping through the sketchbook and you're like reading all these like angry, sometimes deranged thoughts that this person is having,
Sure.
you would feel very differently about what you're reading.
Yeah.
Somehow Twitter and Facebook validates it in a different way where it's like somehow more acceptable. But like the reality is, if you're reading this in like a sketchbook that's tucked away under their bed or something, you would go, I think I need to talk to this person's parents or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or you'll look at it and go, wow, they are a really good artist. Like, I can feel the anger from this art. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
it could be both
Sure.
concerning, but it could also be very impressive.
That's true.
Because, well, a lot of people can take, feelings that they're having, and I use this word a lot, but transmute them into their art. Like, I do a lot with like my depression, like things that upset me or make me feel lonely or whatever. That shit goes right. You can look at fucking digits, and the fact that back then when I believed that I couldn't have alcohol, I'm literally Charlie David. I'm sitting at home by myself on a computer looking at Facebook of pictures of my friends out partying, drinking, hanging out with hot girls, and I'm here alone watching movies, like by myself. Like, that's literally something that happens in the movie, and everyone that's seen that movie has been like, that was a moment for me. That was when you went from just kind of like okay comedy or whatever like that to suddenly I felt like I was in that movie. Like, I related to that character. It's 3/4 of the way through the fucking movie, but it didn't matter that everybody could drink that was watching it and felt that. It mattered that they felt alone. And nobody was like, I think Andrew's suicidal. I think he's going to try to kill himself. But they got it. Like, that loneliness that I had felt for so long resonated with other people. And that, to me, is what made Digits elevated slightly beyond just a stupid little teen mockumentary thing that, with some, offensive comedy and some bullshit like that. It made it into a movie. That's what it really did. So, like, if someone's angry, I feel like if they took it and put it into art, that's gonna be better than tweeting it. And it's just
that's exactly how I feel about it. Is like where I feel most I don't know if I feel like sad about it as a misuse of social media as a media, or if it's a misuse of this imaginary person's like their efforts and their energy, right? Because they could, like you're saying, they could be using that for something more productive, something that has more sustainability than just like a tweet where you post it and it's gone in like at best an hour. Maybe you get an hour.
Yeah.
If you're lucky. But it's like all that could be put into a song, all that could be put into a painting or a sculpture.
Could put it into a dress if you were like a fashion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's the kind of stuff that I think strikes people. I mean, you look at like the Met Gala this past week. AOC had a dress that just had written on it, tax the rich. Now, no matter how you want to look at, her or the fact that the dress had that on there, or what the dress was saying, the fact that she didn't show up in just a Versace gown, you know what I mean, that accentuated her eyes. Like,
I like your take on that, because it did give, I'm sure, especially in that gala, like, she stood out,
right,
like way more than everybody else, right?
Yep. And she
because
still,
that is very unique.
she
to
was
her.
very much still doing the whole like beauty thing where, you know, it was a
Yeah.
very nice dress and she had her hair done and the makeup and all that jazz. But she also had a message that she also wanted to send, and it wasn't, hey, here's a fucking peacock on my head and I'm walking in upside down. Like, you know, that kind of stuff is fun.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it's imaginary
Yeah, yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure if Erin's listening to this, she's probably rolling her eyes at two schmucks like you and me talking about fashion. But the point of the matter is this: like it was something that she put her energy into what she was doing. Like that was an artistic move right
Yeah.
there. I don't care. You can say it was political because it absolutely was, but it was
Sure.
still an artistic decision to do that. And for that alone, I applaud AOC. Like I you know what I mean? That to me was the right way to kind of handle it. She took an event that was all about money, all with people with money, and in a way, like people are calling her a hypocrite for, you know, going and partying with these people, whatever like that. She's fucking trolling them right in front of their very eyes, and they're like, "Yes, we applaud you." And she's probably looking at him, thinking in the back of her head, "Motherfucker, this is about you." Like,
Yeah, that's true. It has a very Banksy sort of
yeah.
appeal to it for sure.
So
I get what you're saying there.
You could look at her as being an idiot or hypocrite, or you could look at her as a master level troll. Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like the and either way, like I don't know. I just think that was like a good move. Like I that's something I would do. That's exactly.
Well, and I would go further into what you're saying. Even with the criticism and negative feedback from it, what the decision she made still had like a bigger I guess I'll say impact. I don't know what other word to use. Response.
Reach.
It had a
I was
bigger
going to say
response.
reach, but yeah.
Yeah, reach is a good one too. Then had she, like you're saying, had she just done some random ass,
Yeah.
you know,
Just some
peacock
pretty
suit or whatever.
She would have gotten more ridiculed if she had shown up and not said anything on her dress. If she was just there for beautify and, you know, weird artsy looks or whatever like that, makeup style, whatever, shoes,
And
whatever kind of shit it was.
And that goes back to sort of what we were talking about of like, yeah, there are just so many good ways that you can use that fire that you might have.
And I think that's the thing. Is like you have to use every medium at your disposal. I think we're going to wrap it up on that. It's that as an artist, you need to pick and choose what medium you think is going to be most effective. So like that's kind of where we started, where we both baselined what it was we wanted. Like it's almost like we're characters, you know, designing ourselves. And it's like we design what we want, and then we figure out what is the absolute best way to do that, to illustrate it, to get that point across, to reach as many people as possible. And that's really what you have to look at when you look at what you're saying. And if you know, it's like that old quote, no matter what you want to say, someone else has already said it better. So I think one of the ways is to look at the people who said it and how they said it. Did they write it on the back of a dress? Did they make a movie about it? Did they make a comic about it? Did they make a rage song about it? And then if you notice that everyone is doing that, then you need to go the opposite direction. You know what I mean? Like if everyone is making a rap song about it, then you know what? Maybe you need to do a classical Renaissance painting. And that's the one that's going to get that reach because it's different. That's how you decide that medium. And, you know, vice versa. It's like if no one's saying it this way, then you got to do it that way. And I think that's the way you decide your medium. Right now, I see a lot of animation where it's very clean, very aesthetic. I want some fucking dirt on it. I want it to look like classic South Park, like construction paper, shit like that. Like add some fucking texture. That's what's missing from animation for me these days is the texture. So like when I'm doing my Christmas short, I want texture on that fucking thing. I want each character to have a texture. I want them to have a physical component to it. It doesn't look so clean and digitalized. And then like I look at the same thing with my movies and I'm like, yeah, this is one of the reasons why people bitch about shooting on film. There's a texture pushed into that. It's like it's almost like if I gave you scrambled eggs and it was fluffy like bread, you'd be like, this is not good. This is not the texture that I want. You wouldn't eat the rest of it. You know what I mean? Like texture means something. So to me, when I look at stuff like that, it's like I want some fucking texture in my aesthetic. I can't have it being so clean and pristine all the time.
Sounds like we've come up with a topic for next week's episode.
Texture? I could go on and on and on about that. Yeah, so we'll wrap this up. I'll ask your final thoughts, Mr. Rainwater,
I
about
feel like
deciding medium.
Yeah, I feel like you summed it up pretty good, but basically, start off with what you actually feel like. I feel like it's good to start off with what you feel most easily engaged in, and not necessarily easy in the sense of like you don't feel challenged, but in the sense of when you get up in the morning, what do you think of first? You know what I mean? Because if you're not responding, like maybe if logically you think like, oh, this should be a sculpture or this should be a painting, this idea that I have, but you don't feel pulled towards it. You're more into like making a card game or like a board game or something. Maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe, you know, that's the angle you need to take on it. And that's this kind of goes back to sort of what we talked about in a previous episode about like instinct and intuition. It's like your interior, your heart, your whatever, your je ne sais quoi, whatever you want to call it, the thing that like drives you to do what you do as an artist, follow it, see where it goes, because that's where you're going to find all the most interesting stuff. And usually that also will help you determine what medium to start off with. And it's also an adventure where you can change when you need to change. There's plenty of opportunities out there to do all kinds of different things. So anyway,
I couldn't have put it better myself. On that note, we'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care.
later.